For those that don't understand this and that, they've got their dollar and all their money in the bank account, versus in gold and silver, I think it's going to be rough for some people, but that's the whole goal of C4SM is to try and encourage people to use sound money now, before the dollar has a big crisis. And that includes states working at the state level to get the states adopting sound money at the state level so that, if the dollar collapses or when, depending on how I think it's a matter of when, but maybe it's if, then the states and the people will be there to pick up the pieces.
Are we headed towards a reemergence of silver and gold used as money? The world is changing like never before, and today we're fortunate to be joined by Mr. Jim Forsythe. He's with the Citizens for Sound Money. Jim's a former Air Force pilot, a former New Hampshire state senator, and he does a lot within the silver and gold community. We're going to cover everything with Jim. Welcome to Ron's Basement.
Thanks for having me. Really appreciate being here.
So, Jim, when you look out at what's going on in the world right now, would you agree that we're going through a period of change that most of us, you, me, and our viewer who's joining us today, a period of change like we haven't experienced during our lifetimes?
Yeah, definitely during our lifetimes, but it has been experienced throughout history. And so, yeah, you were talking in the intro about, gold and silver becoming money again, and seems like it could happen. I think it's inevitable. I mean, if you look at history, fiat has been tried over and over again. It always fails, usually 30 to 50 years. What's unique about the situation we're in, though, is that for the first time ever, there's a world reserve currency that is fiat, and therefore every other currency is backed by that currency, and so every currency in the world is now fiat. So that's what's going to make this like a bigger event than we've seen in our lifetime or even in history is that fact.
Is it a situation where we can say, the cream rises to the top? And I know there's this concept or theory of Gresham's law. Do you sometimes, a lot of people don't agree with me on this, but I in my heart almost feel like, silver and gold have always been there, even, post 1971 when Nixon took us off the gold standard. I mean, I'll set forth the argument, and I think it can be argued that maybe the world never really went off the gold standard, but what we're seeing now is a reemergence. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, that's 100% true. I read this article that talked about when we went off the gold standard, the common prediction by economists was gold's being demonetized, therefore the price is going to drop. It's going to go to zero, or it's going to go way down. And instead, the price rose. Because of the lack of confidence in the fiat currencies, the price has actually gone up, and it's it never stopped being money. And people say people these days think that the government decides what money is. They don't. The people decide what's money is, and the people, when we went off the gold standard, decided gold was still money. Now, that being said, it became, instead of becoming money as in currency that you're spending, at the store, it became money as in savings. And so then we switched to kind of this stacker mentality of let's save up gold and silver, until things collapse, or to protect us against devaluing fiat. And the smart people did that. They held gold and silver versus fiat. And I forget, maybe it's Mike Maloney talks about, the mistake a lot of people make is, so the dollar, you can spend the dollar everywhere, and that's great, but that doesn't mean you save in that currency. You could, it's a currency versus money. It's something that can be transacted with, but it doesn't have that store of value. And so, instead you should be saving with gold and silver and then converting as necessary to buy with dollars. And it's exciting now because now that can be done very simply and with very low friction through asset-backed digital currencies, where you have gold, or you have a token that's backed by gold, and then you can swipe your debit card, have it sell a little bit of gold, switch to dollars, and make that transaction with very low spreads, very low friction, very low fees.
Very, very,
It's
very
exciting.
interesting. But Jim, I don't know what you're talking about the dollar not holding its value. I think I read yesterday that since 1971, when you compare the dollar to gold, the dollar's only lost like 98% of its value.
Yeah, only 98%. That's that's let's see, so 71. I mean, and a lot of that happened within the next 10 or 20 years, right after
Yeah.
70. Or you look at COVID, and that was about a 40% hit in one year.
Mm-hmm.
It printed 40% more dollars, and surprise, surprise, the price inflation rose by 40% as well. So,
Yeah.
I mean, think of, anybody that held a stock that lost 40% in a year would be panicked, most generally.
Right.
Most people would be. And that's one of the big tragedies is, so one of the ways you can protect yourself is not just buying gold and silver, but buying stocks. That can kind of make up for inflation. And so the people that have wealth and have it in the stock market have it in gold and silver have gotten richer and richer and richer as this has happened. Whereas the people without a bunch of assets like that, have really suffered because, their wages don't go up. They don't keep pace with inflation. And so they get poorer and poorer. So we've seen this massive erosion of the middle class. And that's the Cantillon effect where, the wealthy people get the newly printed dollars first and don't pay the price that the poor people do.
Yeah. Jim, you're definitely the smartest guy on this interview right now. So I want to ask you a few more questions. And on behalf of our viewer who's joining us, thank you. But I want to get your opinion on this. We talked about how since 1971, the dollar's lost 98% of its value. I think it's safe to say that 50-year period from 1971 till 2021, those were the best of times for the United States. We're coming off having won in World War II. We won the Cold War. We were the world's hegemony power, right? We kind of dominated the world in many ways. Those were the best of times. Does it scare you at all to think that during the best of times, the dollar lost 98% of its value relative to gold? But now as we look at the next 50 years and look what our children and grandchildren are going to be heading into, that it could be kind of a scary situation. Don't want to be a doom and gloomer, but as we look and try to assess the risk, it feels like we could be heading into decades that could be much more challenging for us.
So I would flip that around actually. When you say, post 70s were the best of times, I'd say post World War II, probably. That's when we were still on a gold standard, although, we were fractional reserve was getting driven up. But, there's this common wisdom that, the way you get full employment is the government hires people. Well, think about the number of people that were laid off from government service coming back from World War II. And the economy just boomed. When that drawdown of government spending happened and the increase in the private sector happened, our economy really, really boomed. And that's how we gained the stature of being the world reserve currency. So post 70s, you could say, I wouldn't say it was the best of times. I would say the U.S. was at its most powerful on the world stage, but that didn't help Americans, being involved in, the Cold War and having people overseas, Vietnam War, all this stuff didn't make us stronger, didn't make us more wealthy. So I'd kind of flip that around and saying that like the post World War II period was really the big economic boom. And then once we went off the dollar standard, things have been pretty bad. But it's kind of like the frog in the pot of boiling water kind of bad, where people don't notice it. They're like, just every year it gets harder and harder for people to make a living. And so then coming up, you're saying, it's going to be really rough. I think it's going to be rough, but as we transition back to sound money, I think we're going to regain that competitive nature and the prosperity that comes with sound money, which is, you can plan for the future. And so it's easier to plan projects. Everybody becomes more productive because of that. And then we get rid of the Cantillon effect so that the middle class can grow again. So I'm actually very optimistic about things in the future. But, For those that don't understand this and that, they've got their dollar and all their money in the bank account, versus in gold and silver, I think it's going to be rough for some people, but that's the whole goal of C4SM, is to try and encourage people to use sound money now, before the dollar has a big crisis. And that includes states working at the state level to get the states adopting sound money at the state level, so that, if the dollar collapses, or when, depending on how I think it's a matter of when, but maybe it's if, then the states and the people will be there to pick up the pieces.
If you're looking to buy gold, silver, or platinum, do yourself a favor and check out Pimbex, the online precious metals bullion dealer and sponsor of Ron's Basement. I was a happy customer before they offered to support the channel. You'll find they have the best prices, quality, and service. I think Pimbex is best, and you will too. And be sure to tell them that you're from Ron's Basement.
Your organization, Citizens for Sound Money, is working on a state-by-state basis to help further legal tender legislation. I always like to throw in that gold and silver are in the United States Constitution. Yep. So you're doing the work that the founding fathers are smiling upon you. I think there's a couple interesting components to all that, one of which is this idea of asset-backed digital currencies. And one of your cohorts, Daniel Diaz, pointed out something to me, it was about a month ago, that I'd never thought of regarding the asset-backed digital currencies and the concept that it can make silver and gold functional again. And I never heard it put that way. And a lot of stackers and a lot of the people that are joining us today, Jim, are diehard. If I don't hold that physical metal in my hand, I don't own it. Now, I think differently. I do like to hold and own physical metal, no doubt, but I'm a believer that if we want gold and silver to really function, that it needs to, we need to be able to use it in transactions easier than taking, an American Silver Eagle to my local coin shop and converting it to fiat and then going to lunch. We need an easier conduit for that to happen.
Yeah, no, that's well, first off, I want to acknowledge that term functional money. We got that from Kevin Freeman. He wrote a book, Pirate Money. I think Daniel's probably talked about that.
Yep.
These are folks, they introduced the idea of an asset-backed digital currency is Texas legislation, and we saw that, and then we got active and started our efforts, and we wound up meeting them, and now I don't know if we can say we're partnered with them, but we are working very closely with them, and they're great people. So they termed they coined that term functional money, whereas C4SM coined the term asset-backed digital currency. Before then, people called it like digital gold or crypto gold, but I think it deserves its own asset class term. But yeah, that's right. And that stacker mentality is something that, I completely understand it. But it's something that we're battling. I bought a grill using silver and an asset-backed digital currency, and one very prominent person called me a moron for spending my silver. And so I turned around and said, well, you're a moron for having any dollars, Yep. So that's the point of asset-backed digital currencies that people have not yet wrapped their mind. Well, some people have wrapped their mind around is, yeah, Gresham's law hold, you don't want to spend the good money, you want to spend the bad money, but why are you holding any bad money? If you can have an account with gold and silver and then use a debit card to go buy items wherever you want, why would you have a traditional bank account? Why would you hold a bunch of dollars? So once you make that mental switch that you're not replacing your stack with an asset-backed digital currency, everybody, and as much of a fan I am about asset-backed digital currencies, everybody should have some physical at home, absolutely free of counterparty risk. But so don't replace your stack, but do replace your bank, or at least supplement your bank with a bank that can hold gold and silver with.
Yeah, why not use all good money? Why not augment your stack with, a functional alternative where you can use your silver, use your gold, to conduct your everyday transactions. The other thing that I like, and I'd like to get your thoughts on this as well, when I talk about, and I like to now use your term, asset-backed digital currency, is the fact that that's actually, the hardcore stackers will say, oh no, if I don't hold it, I don't own it. And I'm like, well, do you realize that if these states, if this legislation gets passed, and Texas has an asset-backed digital currency, in Florida, which is the 15th largest economy in the world, has an asset-backed digital currency, and people start to use it, that could create a massive or a very large or significant increase in demand for the metals. Is that safe to say?
Yeah, not just demand, but what you were talking about getting it into circulation and getting it to be used. The more you use it, every time you use it, it's kind of a pricing mechanism.
Yeah.
When you're deciding whether to spend it or not, and that gold rips up a lot, and you go, okay, I've got a lot of money. I'm going to go spend and buy a few things, right? So remember, we were on a gold standard, and gold wasn't volatile when it was backing the dollar.
Right.
It's the dollar is actually very volatile if you look at it compared to the gold standard. But yeah, gold right now and silver, because of the futures market, is very volatile. And there's a State Department memo that came out that said that was the purpose. We're gonna start up a futures market that's going to create volatility because of it. There's going to be lots of leverage that'll dissuade people from holding gold and silver.
Yeah.
So it's like the chicken or the egg situation. It's going to be volatile until we start using it as money. Once it's used as money, then it won't be volatile. But people don't want to use it as money because it's volatile. Well, it's a chicken or the egg. We got to start. We got to start doing
and it's hard. And I think it's hard for any of us, whether you're an American, you're a European, we are so attuned to thinking of metals in terms of dollars. And I've heard it said before, like, think of your silver or your gold in terms of ounces, but we just, have been programmed to think of it in terms of dollars, and the price is very volatile. And I think that's interesting what you said, because the thoughts crossed my mind. I followed this market super closely for 20 years now. And in particular, lately, it almost feels like in the last 2 or 3 years, it's been a form of psychological warfare against the silver and gold community. I mean, it's like, this doesn't feel right. It feels like there's something going on to really dissuade people from owning silver and gold.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. I was never one that bought into like the manipulation stuff until the last 3 or 4 years, because the setup has never ever been more bullish. But it's been a 3-year consolidation. It's crazy.
Yeah.
So yeah, no, I agree.
You're around my age. We remember the Charlie Brown cartoon where Lucy has the football and Charlie Brown goes to kick it, and it just feels like this constant, just a constant rug pull that goes on within both the metal prices. So your organization is working to get legislation passed in a number of states. Can you give us a feel for, because I know there's some traction in that area already. We've had a number of states that have already passed legal tender legislation, but what do you see going on now? And do you feel like there's continued momentum in that area?
Yeah, so let me first acknowledge, we're not the only ones doing legislation for gold and silver. Sound Money Defense, which is run by Money Metals, and JP Cortez is the guy that does the work there, has been doing a fantastic job, especially focused on getting rid of sales tax and taxes at the state level. So I want to acknowledge that great work. For our first 2 years, we played a support role and just, would email our list to support his legislation. We still want to do that. We still continue to do that. But when we saw the Texas bill, we realized, this idea of an asset-backed digital currency is not something that Sound Money Defense has taken on, and that's fine, but somebody needs to do it. And we're kind of uniquely positioned because that was kind of we've been pushing asset-backed digital currencies as part of encouraging people to use sound money, because it's the best way, really, it is. With the other exception of, I think, gold backs is, for a cash component, there's gold backs is a beautiful product for physical transactions. And so we decided to do it, but it's a much more ambitious legislative initiative than doing taxes. And when I say more ambitious, that means it's more work. And so what we decided is we were going to target about 5 states, and try to get it passed, and then use that as an example for other states. Because once one state does it, it becomes easier for other states to do it. So we wanted to target 5 states. Then we met Kevin Freeman, Economic War Room, and he wrote a book, and we read the book. It's like, shoot, this is what we're trying to do. It's the exact same thing. They're actually targeting about 30 states. So we're working with them to target 30 states. But I think it's going to be for the states that we're targeting, we're coming in with full support, trying to get grassroots activated, trying to get people to testify, doing robocalls, targeted ads, et cetera, spending some money on it. Whereas I think Economic War Room is going to try to get sponsors in 30 states and, kind of hope for the best kind of thing. But they're helping us in the states that we're targeting. So yeah, that's the plan. And the bill is really the way I would describe it is a comprehensive, way to create a gold and silver currency at the state level that is functional, like you said. Mm-hmm. And when I say functional, it's first declared as legal tender, but not all gold and silver is legal tender, because like if somebody comes in with a gold bar that's big and thick, you need some good techniques to make sure that it's authentic. Whereas if somebody comes in with a gold eagle, it's very easy to test. It's very recognizable. You can spot forgeries pretty easily. Gold backs are completely forgery proof, or at least like they're harder to, I'll put it this way, they're harder to forge than a dollar bill. So legal tender specie versus bullion is the first part of the bill. The second part is establish a depository. And that's really coupled with a third part of allowing people's holdings in depositories to be able to be transferred electronically. So that's essentially the asset-backed digital currency. And those second 2 things are probably coupled together. If we anticipate the states would, if they try to do this from scratch, it would cost too much money. But there's companies that have invested millions in this technology. So instead, it's put out a request for proposals, get competitive bids, and then select somebody for a public-private partnership. And the asset-backed digital currency company would likely also run the depository, because that's, they're used to doing that.
Interesting.
So that's the plan. And by legal tender, it's legal for payment of public or debts, public and private, and also payment of taxes. And there's good Supreme Court cases showing that the states, going all the way back to the 1800s, the states do have the authority to, specify what is legal tender in the state for payment of taxes. So yeah, that's the plan. And so far going very well. I think Florida is very promising. We've got a great sponsor down there, Representative Bankson. And we've met with like 80 legislators. Economic War Room had like a dinner where about 50 legislators came to that, gave out copies of the books. New Hampshire is going to be a tougher battle just because of the composition right now. Normally, it's a very pro-liberty state. It's just the House is split kind of 50-50 right now. But this is an issue that should resonate with Democrats as well, because there's no more regressive tax than inflation. So if they want to stand up for poor people, they should absolutely back this kind of a bill.
Yeah, it's probably a matter of education as well. I think the more people realize the benefits to silver and gold, as that knowledge base continues to incubate here in the United States. It was interesting. I heard a gentleman from APMEX, like the world's I believe the biggest bullion dealer in the United States. He said we have a database of 2 million customers who've bought silver or gold from us over the years, but there's 300 million Americans. So really, you're talking about 1 in every 150 Americans. It feels like to me that the interest in knowledge is beginning to percolate, incubate, grow. I think we see things like even this Costco situation where they sold $100 million in gold eagles in the most most recent 3 months, that people are waking up. I also think that, and then I want to circle back and talk about the legislation, but I think we went through one period of inflation that really shook people, and that as we head into this next year or two, I believe from a number of perspectives, domestically in the United States, fiscally, monetarily in the United States, and even on a worldwide basis with what's going on geopolitically, that the table's set for another potential big wave of inflation. And I think the second time it hits, that could be the real wake up call when people go to the grocery store and milk is now $9 a gallon or $11 a gallon, that they're going to be, whoa, I need to do something to protect myself, and that we could see even more interest that I think would feed into support for the type of legislation like you're proposing. This idea in the term asset-backed digital currency, I love it. I think it's great. I think it's totally, but I want to make sure I have this correct. If I live in a state that has an asset-backed digital currency, let's say all the legislation goes through, you've got this public-private partnership and the depository. Essentially, let's say I deposit 100 ounces of silver in the depository. And I would then have an asset-backed digital currency, 100 units or tokens, whatever it would be called, and I probably would have an app on my phone that for each one of those units of that currency that I have or tokens, that there would be a real ounce of metal somewhere. If I spent it, it would be an immediate kind of conversion and transaction. But if I wanted to go pick up 50 of them, I could at some point possibly go to the depository as well.
Yeah. So that's I'm glad you brought that up, because earlier you said, the phrase that everybody says, if I don't hold it, I don't own it. So, right. And I understand trust is at a very low level right now, but there are ways you can be a lot more confident. And the important things in terms of structuring an asset-backed digital currency are, one, that it's a bailee relationship versus custodian. Bailee means you own the metal, that whoever's running the depository is holding it for you. They do not own it. It's not on their balance sheet. If they go bankrupt, it's a pain, but you get your metal back. Like, it'll have to go through bankruptcy court, you get the metal back. So bailee relationship is the most important thing. And that's important not just for pragmatic reasons and trust reasons, but also for constitutional reasons, because it says states cannot emit bills of credit. If this was a custodian relationship where the state owned the metal and they owed you the metal, that would be unconstitutional. But a bailee relationship is constitutional. So that's an important thing. Independent audits, we specify in the bill that it has to be twice a year for independent audits. The third portion, we don't actually specify that the asset-backed currency has to be blockchain. It could be a traditional database, but we think a blockchain is superior, because especially if it's open source, because then you can run a watcher node and you can verify the circulation numbers and make sure they match the physical audits. And that's something at C4SM that we do already to make sure that some of these systems are authentic, is we verify the circulation figures, and blockchain's immutable as well, whereas a database can be altered. So in New Hampshire, the sponsor who is on the blockchain council, like very in tune with blockchain, actually decided to specify that blockchain was required, open source, decentralized blockchain, which I think was a wise thing to do. But we wanted to have as many vendors as possible bidding on contracts, so we didn't place that specification. So independent audits, not only of the physical asset, but also of the tokens that are backed by that physical asset. And that way you can ensure that it's one-to-one. And then the final thing is it has to have a redemption option. There are systems out there like PAX-G where you can redeem it, but for a 400-ounce gold bar, which is out of reach of most people, it has to have a pragmatic, practical redemption. And maybe that's 100 ounces of silver. Preferably, it would be very, very small denominations, like, you could take out one gold back,
Right.
And I think that's coming. We didn't specify a low redemption limit, but we did specify it has to be redeemable. You also have to be able to deposit your gold into the system. Because if you can't deposit and redeem, you're forced into fiat again. If you have to deposit fiat to buy the metal, then that doesn't help people.
As long as it's a specie, it qualifies as legal tender in the particular state, you could deposit it in the depository.
So that's actually an interesting. So this was a lot of debate. It doesn't have to be. So there's legal tender specie, which would be like gold eagles, silver eagles, maybe gold backs, whatever the state determines to be legal specie, which has to be recognizable in a form that's designed to be used as money. But the depository doesn't have to be backed by that legal tender specie. It can be backed by bullion. Okay. The difference is if you're putting something to a depository, you've got experts that can assay it and have quality controls to make sure, whereas a store owner can't verify a gold bar, but the depository can.
Yeah.
So depository can be backed by either specie or bullion, but so yeah, you could deposit silver bars into the system in that case. Yeah.
And that makes total sense, because the whole basis of it all is silver, or our silver and gold, right? I mean, it's not being based upon a particular coin or bar, or it's being based upon silver, gold.
Fortuna Silver Mines is a global intermediate gold and silver producer. Since 2005, Fortuna's best-in-class management has delivered impressive growth and profits. Fortuna's solid financial position and operational expertise allows for performance in any precious metals price cycle and provides a foundation from which to harvest great profits in more favorable metals markets. Investing in Fortuna is an investment in quality, long-term, sustainable production of in-demand precious and base metals.
So my question is, I live here in Missouri. When we get our depository, I guess I'll be able to show up there every morning and tell them I want to withdraw my 100 ounces of silver. And I can hold it in my hand and say, okay, I just wanted to make sure it was here, and then hand it back to them, right? I'm sure they.
What's funny is I did exactly that with Kinesis 2 years ago. I did a redemption for 200 ounces. I got 200-ounce Engelhard bars. I took them into Golden Eagle, a local coin store, had them, take readings on it, make sure it was pure silver, et cetera.
Right.
And then my wife goes, "What are we going to do with this thing?" Or these things. And I said, so I called them up and I deposited one of those bars back into the system and got my tokens back, and then spent them on a grill.
Yeah, there you go.
So yeah, absolutely. And, and that ability is, in my opinion, vitally important. Because if you look at the bank runs in the Great Depression, it was because people figured out the money wasn't there. So they did a bank run. And, despite audits and, you can always start getting suspicions. You need to be able to withdraw it. And as well as cash is very important for privacy reasons. Anything that's online, any blockchain, there's some blockchains that have tried to enforce privacy and stuff, but you gotta assume that it could be public. Somebody could figure something out about your accounts or whatever. So the ability to redeem and spend it privately is incredibly important. So that's why we definitely focused on having a cash component of the system.
Yeah. And, two final thoughts from me as we look at this prospect of CBDCs coming from, I guess, the Fed or the, central bank level. Gold and silver could potentially become like the last bastion of financial privacy, which I think could bode well for those of us who are, if that indeed comes to fruition, that we're a little bit ahead of the curve at this point. And then you talked about the banks during the Great Depression, when people realized the money wasn't there. And I can't help but say, Jim, but it's so nice now because we know the banks now have all of our money. It's all there. They haven't made any bad investments in commercial real estate or U.S. Treasuries. It's all there as long as the bank term funding program stays in place. Then it's all there.
Well, and that's just another potential huge inflation trigger is
Yeah,
if those guys mess up and the money is not there, they can always print it.
sure.
FDIC, I don't think is going to fail because they can just print it. Like you will get your dollars back in
Yeah.
nominal terms, but not in real terms.
Yeah, and the analogy I like to use, I'm not a drinker, but I do remember back when I did that, like Jack Daniel's whiskey is 80 proof or 40% alcohol. And when we talk about I like to use the term the dilution of the U.S. dollar. Just if we look at what went on during the C-19 crisis when they printed whatever 40% of the US dollars, diluted the dollar. I always like to tell people, it'd be like if you went to your local liquor store to buy a bottle of Jack Daniels and the price is the same, but you look on the bottle and instead of being 80 proof, now it's 60 proof. You wouldn't stand for it. You'd be buying a diluted product. And maybe not the best analogy, but I think as we wrap this up, one thing I'm taking away from our conversation is the timeless value of silver and gold. And I think you started out early in our conversation here saying that, right? Like history, during our lifetimes, I think a lot of the viewers are like you and I, like we've only experienced what we've experienced, for me, in the last 53 years. But if we broaden our scope to 500 years or 2,000 years, similar type scenarios, many times the same situation that we're in now have unfolded, and silver and gold have proven themselves winners when it comes to protecting wealth and protecting value.
Yeah, it's like I said at the beginning, is if you study history, it's the return of gold and silver to money is not just a theory, it's inevitable.
Yeah.
You've studied history enough. You're right. You have to go back. We've been in a very artificial mechanism ever since World War II ended, and we had this massive debt to GDP, and so they kept interest rates low. They had yield curve control, and they wiped out the bondholders. So we've kind of been in this artificial market for a long time. So if you just go based on your experience, and that's what's great about travel too, is I went to the Soviet Union as a kid, which is why I became such a big believer in freedom. But to see them have a currency collapse,
Mm-hmm.
and Putin's sitting there talking about the U.S. having a currency collapse. I don't think he's wrong. They've experienced it, so they have that recent memory to know and see the signs, whereas we don't. But it's coming.
Yeah, and I think you and I talked about this before we came online. Like, the United States is subject to the same rules of mathematics as Argentina, Turkey, the Soviet Union, Venezuela. We have to deal with the same laws of mathematics, and just because it hasn't happened yet, and I had this conversation with a few people last week that if you think back to I worked in the tech industry during the tech bubble. Everything was great. Everything was wonderful. And then suddenly it wasn't. I mean, it was like it happened all of a sudden. And I remember I'm sure you do as well, the real estate and the real estate bubble and mortgage situation that unfolded in 2007, 2008. Everything's great. And then it's not. So, we'll I guess rest easy that we've protecting ourselves with silver and gold. On behalf of the viewer who's joined us today and me, you've been very generous with your time. You really are the smartest guy in the room. And we appreciate, you sharing your knowledge, but also the work you're doing to help people, throughout the country, throughout, state on a state-by-state basis with the legal tender legislation. I'll put links to Citizens for Sound Money in the description. Is there anything that I forgot to ask you, forgot to mention, anything you want to say as we wrap up?
Just, let's see. If you want to give, we have I had them here somewhere, but 5th ounce rounds. If you want to give some of those away to your viewers, we'd be happy to do that.
Okay.
They've got our website on it. If they go to our website and sign up for the newsletter, then we we're a little behind right now, but we try to send out something once a month with a coupon code so they can get more of those rounds at cost, which
Okay.
for fifth ounce round, it's nice because you can give them away as tips. You can give them to people and educate people. I do want to give a shout out to Daniel Tinkham, who was on your program and said he wanted to meet me and give me a 10-ounce bar. He did just that. We had a nice lunch in New Hampshire. So, and then he went and testified to the New Hampshire committee and did a great job.
Yeah.
Um,
Go ahead.
One more thing. So you were saying, get gold and silver, protect yourself. That's great. People need to do that, but also spread the message to other people. And that's why I love your show, is you're doing exactly that, spreading that word, because it's not enough to protect yourself. If you don't protect your neighbors and your friends and your family, they're going to be hurting when the time comes.
Yeah, and trust me, if you tell them enough times, eventually they'll most of them will start to listen.
Yeah, well, and it's funny you ask about like the reception on this. I went to New Hampshire and I was talking with some of the same people I served with 10 years ago. And I talked about this stuff back then because I thought 2008 was it, and it wasn't. But I think it's at this time. But the reception is very different 10 years later, and especially after 2020. Yeah, people are much more open to this now than they were 10 years ago.
Yeah. Well, and I hear it all the time, and I'm sure you do as well, and our viewer does. Like, people sense that something's not right. People have this sense that there's something wrong with what's going on. So that's interesting to hear that you've noticed a discernible difference in terms of reception. To the message from silver and gold. It's going to be an interesting 10 years ahead. That's for sure. And
or 2 years.
What's that?
Or an interesting 2 or 3 years.
Yeah, or an interesting year. I mean, it's and you mentioned this, but it feels like everything. You thought 2008 was it, but it wasn't, right? They were able to paper over it, or however you want to say it, that the system, that the situations are escalating. I've heard several people say this, and I'll say it myself, that these situations that we're experiencing are escalating and that they're happening more frequently. And maybe that's why, the general feeling out there is that something's not right, because something's not right. I mean, $34 trillion is not right.
We've hidden inflation over the last 10 years by exporting it. And that's the big change that's happened, is these other countries are not putting up with it anymore and letting us export their inflation. They're de-dollarizing, and so I was talking to a friend in Latin America, and I was like, I'm sorry we exported our inflation. He's like, don't worry, it's coming back to you guys. Yeah, I think he's right.
we just packaged it up. It'll be there before you know it, right?
Yeah.
Thank you, Jim. Hopefully we'll see you again in the basement. And if you need anything, let us know.
Yeah, happy to come on anytime. We'll be giving you updates on legislation as we go.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.